Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Finding the Beauty in Tragedy Summit. We appreciate you being here. And today I have a very special guest all the way from Australia, Linda Meredith. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here with you. What a joy.
Oh, we're excited to have you. And I'm going to give a little background of you and we'll jump into all the goodness that you have for us today. So I'm going to read this because Linda has a lot of credentials behind her. And so I don't want to flub it all up. She's the first of so many things. So Linda is Australia's first certified trauma recovery coach and supervisor. She is the world's first NPE trauma recovery coach. She is the founder of the world's first complex trauma recovery membership for individuals. And she is the founder of the world's first complex trauma trained certification for trauma coaches. So many wonderful things, Linda. You're amazing. And we're just really excited to have you here. And before we jump into your story and how everything came to be, I'm going to give an overview of your story because, guys, there is a lot of information that Linda's going to give you today. And her story is tremendous and unbelievable. And I want to give the overview so that if anyone can relate to this, we're going to hit it out of the gate, like right from the start of this interview. So Linda's overview of her story is that she went from wife and mother to then losing her health, lost cognitive functions, so couldn't walk, talk, eat, bathe, lost her memory, and then she was bedridden for 2 years. So that is in a nutshell. Now that doesn't encompass everything but that's in a nutshell what has happened. And so, Linda, let's go back and paint a picture of your life growing up for us.
Well, it seems like yesterday, I think, for a lot of us. But then it was in some ways so long ago. But the impact of those younger years when my parents were pretty volatile in their relationship, and my conception was outside of marriage, which back in the day, back in the 60s, it wasn't considered a done thing in this really tiny town that I came from. And I know some people face that even today. And so back then, my grandparents actually gave my parents a choice whether they would marry or not. And if they didn't want to, one of my set of grandparents would have raised me. But they decided to get married. And then very quickly, 13 months later, my younger brother arrived. But because the marriage was volatile, I very much went from grandparents around, just moved around sort of thing, because mum had to work as well. So it was a pretty lonely existence for me, and I was often given responsibility for my brother at a very young age. And there was always the things that weren't said. It took me a lot of years to realise that even though I was going through a lot of self-help, self-awareness work from around age 20, it took me a long time to understand that in my family, it was more about what wasn't said than what was said. So a lot of it was implied and a lot of mistakes made until I worked out what the actual dynamics were in my family. And it was not the healthiest of environments. And pretty soon my parents split up. I was left with my grandparents. And so overnight, my family disappeared and I didn't know why. So when your core family disappears overnight at 4 years of age, it becomes what I know now is an abandonment wound. So I used to look for my mum every day and I didn't know where any of them were. And if I tried to ask my nan, whom I loved dearly, where they were, it was like, it's just that we don't talk about that. So they eventually got back together. That didn't last long either. It was back in the days when women didn't or couldn't have their own checkbook. They couldn't own their own home. They couldn't sign at the bank. There was all this. So my mum had the foresight to say to my dad, well, if you're coming back, then we have to buy our own home, which they did. But it wasn't too long after that, he was playing around again. And then mum found out and she basically kicked him out. So back in those days, that wasn't a common thing at all. It was very much so when I look at my grandparents, my grandmothers didn't work. They worked from home. So if they did anything, they did it from home. So my life was pretty all over the shop internally as far as emotions were, and we didn't talk about it. I only mentioned to my youngest son the other day how my mum never said I love you. And when she was dying, her final words to me were, thank you for being my beautiful daughter. But we kind of understand more now as we've gone on that her mother hated her and all these. So there was just so many underlying family dynamics that I didn't know about that actually were impacting my life. And I started looking at my family and seeing what was dysfunctional from a very young age. Yeah. And I became my brother's mother from a very young age. So things would happen for him at school and they'd pull me out of class to come and comfort him. Things like that, which produced patterns where in adult life, he'd just rock up to my house out of nowhere with no forewarning or anything, like go and grab the key from another relative and come just be able. I came home from work one day and he'd be unpacking his car into my home, So all of the things that happened in my childhood had impacts that were very far-reaching, as did the things that happened to my grandmothers. And before that, actually had very far-reaching impacts into my health later in life.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's so much to carry as a child, an adolescent. You're going into these years of, development when you're so young, self-discovery, and then to be the caregiver, really, to be the person taking care of another sibling and acting like the mother figure and having that responsibility. It's a lot of pressure and it's a lot of not understanding, right? At that time, you just don't understand.
No, not at all. And in our teenage years, my brother wanted to go and live with our father. And at the time, the schools were having strikes. So I didn't want to live with my father, and my mother knew I didn't. But I organised for my brother to go and live with my father. So we didn't speak to our mother. It was just I organised it all and went with him, not understanding that I actually had a choice not to go. Like there was no ability to form language around what I could or couldn't do. That was what my brother wanted. So I took care of it. You know what I mean? So that caretaking role was placed in my life from a very young age without me even knowing it.
Exactly. And then before we go on to the next stage of your life, knowing now what you know and how what I'll call an emotionally uncommunicative family, if someone is experiencing that, let's say, because it's hard when you're adolescent, you don't know how to approach something like that. You think that that's the way that it should be, right? You're learning by example from your parents. But
That's
if
right.
someone's watching this now that's in their mid to late 20s and beyond, and they've moved on from their house, but they feel that they have this relationship with their family that doesn't communicate, what would be your best advice to give them of how to break that barrier down and start to have conversation?
Oh, definitely. The first thing that you need to do, because when we have families that don't communicate, we never actually learn the language around our emotions. So we haven't learned yet to put actual identification to what I'm feeling and then be able to verbalize that. Like that actually takes a lot of work. It sounds simple, but it actually takes work and practice to feel comfortable to verbalize that. So the quickest thing to do is get on Google and search for an emotions wheel, print it out, and especially if you've got kids, the quickest way I found to learn it was with my kids, and to start putting language to emotions as they come up, but to be curious about those emotions. Just don't assume, oh, it's that and that's it. Explore it a bit deeper so that you've got language before you go to your family, before there's ever an interaction with your family. You want to begin to get courage and confidence around what's happening internally for you.
That is such great advice and something so simple that people can do. And as you're diving into those emotions and understanding them, you're right about them, right? Do you feel it's helpful to people that really haven't had the language associated around certain emotions? If you don't understand something yourself, just write about it so that you feel comfortable gaining that courage, right? So just take the time, like you said, dive into it. I love that. That's such a great advice for people. So take us into the next phase of life. You're in your early 20s and you're discovering, right? You're putting a narrative to what this was. And then what's the next phase look like?
So the next phase begins when I'm about 20. I actually didn't know it at the time, but I worked for what's called a Fortune 500 company. So it was a very big company. And they actually brought people from America out to educate our company in this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So the self-awareness, doing exercises to understand what's happening internally. And it was the greatest gift because it was the first thing that I actually was able to hold on to and know that I'm just not imagining that there's more to what's happening for me than I can even wrap my mind around. So even when I say to you, go on Google an emotions wheel, begin to put language to it, I would say journal it out, then it still takes time for our mind to wrap around us doing something different. So I began, that was actually a really big step for me to begin searching for more answers. And I was in a relationship at the time and I just went, you know what? I cannot see my life being stuck in the backwater. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. It was just all the language that I had at the time. I can't see myself being stuck here for the rest of my life, married to someone with 3 kids, 2 dogs, a home, and that's all my life consists of. I had no idea how to put it any other way. So I left. And then I began traveling everywhere. So around Australia, country Australia, and then I did end up back in Sydney City, but then, and Matt got married. We eventually, we moved to Brisbane pretty much after he got married because he got transferred. Mm-hmm. And I've been here ever since. And shortly after that, we began our family as well. And it was when my first son came along. So I'd had bits of ill health, but nothing major. So, glandular fever. There was another thing too, like my stomach all gets upset and just things that were brought on by stress back in the day. But then when I had my first child, it took me 5 months to work out that I had postnatal depression. And I went to my GP and I said, I've got postnatal depression. And he sat there, his jaw literally hit the floor. Like he went, no, not you, no way. And I was like, it was really odd, like, why not me?
Right. Can't I have this?
Yes, like, seriously.
What does that mean?
Yeah, I was like, oh, okay. But what I didn't know at the time was this was normal to have this happen for somebody who had been through all the things I'd been through in childhood, and which at that stage I still didn't have language for to wrap around, and the intergenerational trauma as well handed down. There would have been nothing I could have done to avoid it. However, because of my resourcefulness and learning about it and a whole bunch of other stuff at the time, I didn't have it happen when I had my second and third child. Plus also I didn't have to go back to work when they were 5 months old either. So it was a big change. It gave me time to be a mum as well. So there wasn't that extra added pressure. Yeah. So it was a journey and a half. And then when I think it was about 12 months after I had my third child that the sexual abuse memories came up. And it was, even though it was like I had an answer at last, I still knew that there was so much more. I ended up divorced and remarried, and it wasn't until after I got remarried and all of a sudden I realized that that person wasn't there for the right reasons. And in my naivety, as I say at the time, because it feels like you're really like naive, like how could I not have seen this?
Right.
You know, how did I not know that the person wasn't there for the right reasons? All of a sudden, all the accumulated distress. So stress is something that we can learn how to manage, but distress is out of our ability to function or to control or to put a set of dynamics or steps into place that can help. So that happens from when we're in childhood, the distress, the overwhelm, and all of that stays stored in our brain. So that when that one moment of distress happened, like this is right outside of my control, why someone would get married for the wrong reasons, and it just, all of it came tumbling down, all the distress that my brain had held on to for all of these years, because I didn't know, I didn't have language, I didn't have structures, I didn't learn strategies, and that includes things like social strategies, life strategies, just so many different things that I didn't know, that I didn't have in order to be able to function in life in a healthy way.
Right.
So my brain just crashed, just went, this is just like one thing too much, and pushed me over the edge. Yeah.
And so that was, so I want to kind of paint this picture so people are understanding this. Was it something that it was the realization of the marriage and then the awareness, the memories coming back from the sexual abuse, that culmination of the two of them coming into play that set you into this motion, like set you into that phase of your health? Explain how the intermixtion of them, that's not a word, but I like to make up words.
So the sexual abuse memories came up and I began dealing with them. And I was so blessed to find a lady who actually taught, as part of her counselling, John Bradshaw's work. And so he's American. He was at the forefront of a lot of this work as well. And so I got a lot of help in order to move through that. However, it wasn't enough to shift all the things that were stored in my brain, in my amygdala, from all the decades before as well. Yes. Okay. So then when this happened, because for me, my goal, having come through divorce and all the stuff in childhood, all the dysfunction, the no love in my life, and emotional neglect is so incredibly traumatizing for a child. It was then, in that moment, I didn't ever want to get divorced, not ever. And so when this revelation happened to me, I realized that I would end up divorced a second time, and I was just beyond devastated. Like, it was all out of my control. Plus the distress that the brain's holding on to from decades ago So it hasn't filed away. Janina Fisher calls trauma our living legacy because it's alive now inside of us, and it is. And I didn't know that at the time. So it all came crashing down, everything, and I didn't know why. So I can look back and understand, okay, that was the catalyst, that all of a sudden there was so many things outside of my control. But what I didn't know was that there was still so much distress stored in my brain from intergenerational trauma through to the trauma I had experienced, and then to reach a place in my adult life where things were going to fall apart again. And I'd already been through it once. It was just too much and too overwhelming for my brain to wrap around, for my mind to wrap around. And I didn't know at the time that one of the things that we come out of childhood trauma with, childhood developmental trauma, is a psychological wound as well. So we can have a psychological wound, a underdeveloped self. So we never get to develop a sense of ourself, a sense of agency of who we are. And that's hooked into our brain as well. So it's another part of our brain that we need to develop. So our brain is engaged in that as well. And all the other forms of abuse, the emotional, witnessing the physical, and going through financial abuse as an adult, the mental abuse, and all of these things kept compiling to the point where my brain simply had no more capacity to store anything else. Because without the structure and strategy and the experiences, okay, now we need experiences to be able to change our brain, okay? So without all of that, my whole world just crashed. And it wasn't for lack of trying.
Right.
You know, I had tried everything available to us prior to that as well.
And so explain too, because I love where you go with the neuroscience of it all, because that's so informative to us too. So when we get to that stage of it's a shutdown, our brain is in a shutdown. It's like the fight or flight, and the brain has to, like when we sleep, we heal, we recharge, and the brain, think of it like a battery. It shuts down. It needs to be charged, and it needs to find new discovery. So explain physically what happens in the brain so that people can understand that you're not, I hear people say sometimes like, I'm crazy, I can't do this, I can't think, like, and you and I share this in common of forgetting, not being able to do certain things, like I couldn't string sentences together. I couldn't have normal thought processes. And I thought I was crazy, and that you're not, there's a science going on. So can you explain the science behind, so people realize it's normal?
Yeah. Well, one of the hardest parts about what I'm going to explain to you is that you're not going to know that this is happening for you. Okay. So when we come through so much developmental trauma where we don't get early developmental stages met as well, is that it's so overwhelming that the distress gets stored in part of our brain that's called the amygdala. Now, our filing cabinet of the brain is called the hippocampus, okay? So when we have experiences in life, so if you were to think of an experience that you've had, that you had to search back in your memory, but it was a really good experience where you get a picture of it, you can have the smells, the sights, sounds, like you actually are resourcing that information from your hippocampus. So I always think, you know, you've got like this big hippopotamus that just gets files that keep getting fed into it, and it just gets, you know, it's a happy hippo when all the files get filed away and it's all hunky-dory.
I love that. Great association.
Yeah,
I remember.
Yeah, that's good. But the amygdala holds on to all the things that we don't have language for. So prior to 10 months in age and younger, our amygdala takes all that information via our sensory system. Okay, so anything that's stored in there, not filed away in the hippocampus, so anything that was overwhelming is stored in the amygdala, and it's sensory. So we're looking for a sensation in our body. 10 months to 5 years of picture images. So we don't necessarily have language for it then either. There'll be visual images. So we might have nightmares and the visual images are coming up, and we know that it's from the past, but our brain is putting association around it from our current day. So I might have a nightmare that's something in the past because it's stored in the amygdala, but what the brain does to file it away into the hippocampus is put language and images and experiences around it from my adult world as well. Mm-hmm. So those two things, when it's all triggered, so they're all in the limbic system and the limbic system is triggered, we actually don't have access to a really important part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. Because with the prefrontal cortex online, it does file away everything for us. Okay, mm-hmm. It's order, it's the place where we are able to see the consequences of our actions. So if that part of the brain's been offline for a very long time, which for a lot of us it has with complex trauma, and we don't know it, okay, then it makes it really hard to come into recovery without knowing that, without that understanding, because it's such an important part of the brain that when you get it back online, it does all the filing away for you. It regulates the body. So you'll hear a lot around social media, if you've got to regulate your nervous system. Well, the reality is if you've got your prefrontal cortex online, it'll regulate your nervous system for you. Okay? This is how vital it is. It enables us to do things like keep track of our finances and keep them in an order. So anything that you need an order for, so you may find that you can't keep your day in an order. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be a really good sign that it's not online. Okay. And we live this way for so long, and it's so much our normal that we don't know that there's another way to live. Right. And that's been a big part of my journey, is to work out, okay, how do I get it back online? How do I get back in my body into the here and now? How do I make this happen? And what's happening? This is just the first step that happens. Right. So then I developed trauma-informed movement to consciously tell my brain to get this part back online, and so that I could begin to get well. And as I've gone through this process, it revealed the levels that came with it, and the other parts of the brain that I needed to look into to be able to recover from all of this and, regain my memory. Right. Just recently, I've started to remember the things that happened with my kids. So I lost a lot of memory around things that I used to do with my kids as well. So that's been really good.
That is good. That is good. It's an ongoing journey, right? It's something that constantly takes time. We're ever growing and evolving. It's never a one stop, I'm going to be fixed and done, right? That's not how it goes. Yeah.
No, not at all. But I have reached a point where I know now that my prefrontal cortex is so engaged that I'm actually starting to adult in my mind as well. So I'm actually able to say, these are my goals. This is what I need to do. This is the order that needs to happen. And until now, I haven't been able to do that. So I'm really happy.
Yes, of course.
We're coming together. Yeah.
Of course. And so let's jump into that when you went offline. I love how you say that. Let's jump into when you went offline and what that experience was like, because I know that there's a story attached to this of being undiagnosed and the frustration and anxiety of it. So let's dive into what that looked like for you.
That was really hard. even now I can get pretty emotional about it, because the medical people that were around me at that time overdosed me, for starters, because they treated a lot of the physical symptoms. Nobody ever looked for, well, why would a normal everyday housewife who's been functioning really well just be unable to function? And even speaking to the GP, who said to me, "You're pregnant," and I said, "Well, how did that happen?" You know, because I was on the pill. And I'm like, "What?"
Wait a minute.
You know, he'd known my history, my medical history and everything. And yeah, he was one of the ones that changed medications and overdosed me. And then the specialist overdosed me, who should have known better. And on it went until I was just so doped up on drugs it wasn't funny, and I ended up having grand mal seizures, which I'd never had in my life. So then husband took me to a neurologist, and she just sat there in shock on her face. At this stage, I couldn't talk at all. And he was my full-time carer. So I literally had a full-time carer. And she just said, "How can they have done this? You're so overdosed." So they put me into, I don't know why, but they put me into, she insisted that I go to a mental health ward. I'm not sure what you call it in America.
Psychiatric ward, same mental health ward.
Yeah. I was there 3 days and they kicked me out and they said, "You don't belong here." And I thought, how can they even know that? And I can't talk.
Right. So there's a disconnect here, right?
You're going to another part of the hospital to make sure you've got oxygen, and you don't belong in this section. And I'm like, okay, I'm glad someone can see something I can't.
Right.
And I was trying to tell them to put me back on my original epilepsy medication, because that was something that happened to me at 15, just out of nowhere. Like, no one knows why I got it. Now I do. But I got out of there and it was still another year because they put me on the wrong medication. And by the time another year was up, I was able to talk more. Well, I was actually able to express some things, and said I wanted to go back to the neurologist. And he took me, and she said to me, "Yes, I will put you back on your original medication. You've come so far in a year, and I believe I won't ever see you again." And she hasn't. I've had no need to. So it was a long journey when I finally came to. It took about 2.5 years, and I was lying in bed, and I just went, my mind was clear enough by this stage to say, somehow I've got to get out of this bed. I don't know how, but somehow I've got to work it out. And it took so long. Now that I look back, it took so long for my mind to even be able to process how I could get out of bed and take one step and not fall over. So at that stage, all the medication, I was probably twice the size I am now. And I was like, there's no one here. What am I going to do? How am I going to make sure that I don't fall over? So I literally had to lie in bed, hope and pray like crazy that when I sat up, I didn't fall over. And when I took one step, that I always had something to hold on to. So that's why I teach everybody just one step. But let's work out how we can do just one step, and it feels safe and comfortable to do one step, because I know that that's what it took me. And so from there, I used to walk this long hallway out across the kitchen, out to another room to my computer. And that's where I found Facebook. This is back in 2011. And quickly found Facebook groups. And because of all the years of study that I'd already done towards understanding what's happening internally, I began to help other people. But in doing so, I was able to access a thesaurus. So I could type slowly, and then I know there's a word for that. What's that word? And then go looking for the word. And it took me some time to do that. But the day that I walked up and down that hallway 4 times, I just went, I know I'm going to make it. I didn't know it was still going to take years.
But it didn't matter, right? It didn't matter. Well, all that mattered is that that's what's done. And that I love what you say, because I say this to people too. It's one step. It's one small goal. It doesn't have to be monumental, right? It's one thing, but that one thing makes the world of difference. Didn't matter how far you had to go, right? It's like, I walked up and down the hallway 4 times. Like, this is great, right? You're retraining your entire body how to use your motor skills, right? I mean, it's like, think about a baby, right? And people don't realize that this happens. And so I love that you're sharing this. But you are learning how to live again.
That's right. And then when I could finally stand up long enough, and I was in the kitchen and thinking about, someone said to me about cooking dinner. I just remember the kids being there, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I had no memory of how to cook. And then I went, I can't even remember how to do the washing. I felt like I wanted to have like bunches of tears fall down my face. But I went, I haven't got time. I've got to work it out. And so I started having to go through this process of literally rewiring my brain about how to do things. And thankfully, my kids were very, very patient and understanding that I just had to work it out. And so that was a whole other section of let's remember how to live just day to day.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so now, being where you're at right now, and you look back on this time, right? Like we talked, still an ongoing journey always, but when you look back on that time, how do you view it now as opposed to how you were viewing it when you were going through it?
Now I think I'm a damn legend.
Yes, you are. Yes.
And I don't say that lightly. I was just like, I look back now and I think, you had no answers. So I'd sit on the computer and I'd say, we're all Google doctors, let's face it.
Oh, right.
And the closest I came to understanding what was going on was an acquired brain injury. And I went, it's still not it. So what I did back then was started viewing myself as having an acquired brain injury and working with the brain to the best of my ability. But I still kept looking for answers because I wanted to be able to function. And I look back now and I think, oh my goodness, the courage it took to keep going when no one had answers, like literally no one, and they couldn't even wrap their mind around what was happening for me. So no medical person could understand. And it was really hard in certain stages too, going to doctors and saying, look, this is what's happening, and no answers whatsoever. But I didn't give up.
Don't give up. Never give up. Because I'm sure that's happened to a lot of people,
Definitely.
and it's very frustrating. And you know that there's more, right? You know that there's something else.
Definitely. And so I had this sense one day that I had to go and study. And I was like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. I've got no brain memory, So I went, oh, this will be interesting. So, I have this personal relationship with my creator. And I said, well, if that's what you want me to do, then you have to bring it to me because I don't believe I can do it.
Yeah.
And it did. It just happened. I took my son to one of his appointments and I had to go and get a new Medicare card. We have a whole different health system here, and you go to doctors and you just give them your Medicare card because we have a free system here. Mm-hmm. And as I went, oh my goodness, I can't go there. It's the middle of the day, too many people, too much traffic. I thought, but I have to go. So I went down there, and there's actually a car park out the front. And then this lady greeted me out the front about studying. And and it was about something else. But I said, oh, do you have counselling? She said, yes. And I went, that's it. So even in my muddled mind back then and the brain's still not functioning, I went, I'm going to give it a go. What's the worst that can happen? I fail.
Right, exactly. And really, what is that? That's nothing, right? I mean, from where you've been to, it's like,
that's right.
Yeah.
So I go and do the entrance test. I get top of the class and I'm like, how did that happen? Because the first time I go to take the test, of course, I have extreme anxiety, meltdown, migraine, and I had to go to the teacher and say I have to leave. And I think what's important to take from all of that is that I know as an adult this is not who I am.
Yeah.
So as an adult, I want to sit here, I want to take this test, I want to be able to do that. But my whole system's not batting for me, it's batting against me. Right. So I came back the next day and did the test and passed and got in, and so that was the first thing I studied. And then I tried uni, but university didn't have what I was looking for, and I knew that there was no point going and doing psychology or any of that because it just wasn't what I needed. Right. Especially when I had a psychologist say to me once, you're doing fine. You're doing better than most of my other clients. You'll be fine. And I'm sitting there saying, oh, there is something really wrong with me. And I know it, but I don't know what it is.
Right. Yeah. I know I will be fine, but I want to figure out what's going on. Like I get that, and I don't care about other clients. I care about me.
That's right. And so every door I opened back then was like, you'll be fine. And I'm like, you just don't get it. There's something critically not right. And I can't function in a way that I want to be able to function in life. So I tried a couple of things at uni that just didn't work either. And then one of my clients at the time told me about the trauma coaching. And I went, that's it. That's me. I'm there. And everything happens like it thought. You know how it happens right at that last minute. And I got in like at the last day or something. And then when I finished that, I went, no, I don't need to go on and do the other advanced and supervisor at this stage. And I went off and studied the neuroscience. That was the next thing that landed in my lap. And when I began to understand what was happening in the brain and how powerful our brain is, and how much it drives and how much it shuts down, I just went, my goodness, this is the answer. So I said, okay, if my prefrontal cortex is offline because of the trauma, I, Linda, the adult here, need to be able to retrain my entire system. So with trauma, it's not just the brain, it's the breathing, it's the body, it's the mind. I need all of these to come together so that I can begin to heal my brain. And that's basically how I ended up doing that. And then I went back and did more study with the trauma coaching as well, until I'm at the stage now where I'm actually writing an experiential certification for training, because globally, psychologists, psychiatrists are not trained in complex trauma. I have them as my clients. So I have psychologists and psychiatrists as my clients because they're not trained in it at all. So trauma informed is not trauma trained.
And I'm so happy that you brought that up, because if you didn't, I was going to, because Linda shared this with me in our first conversation. And if you're like me, I did not know that. I was not aware of that. It was a shock to me. It was very eye-opening to be like, how are they not? How, and to understand, really, you hear trauma informed, right? Your brain kind of goes to the assumption you're a psychologist, right? And this isn't to bash any psychologist, the field of work, but you just assume, as I did, that this is something that they are trained on, but they're not.
Absolutely.
And that is so interesting.
Absolutely. There's so many moving pieces to the puzzle, but I was fortunate to, in one of my studies, to find out what was going on. So generally speaking, you'll hear people like Bessel van der Kolk and Janina Fisher, and there's a whole bunch of professionals who've actually tried to get the DSM to recognize complex trauma. Okay. And they would never say why.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So they'd say this would happen or that would happen. But I knew there was a missing piece. And then when I did some different training, there was a brain doctor, I can't remember his name, but he's, really well qualified in the neuroscience, and the hosts were talking about how the DSM hasn't recognized complex trauma. And they kind of quietly said, that's because people aren't trained in college for it, so the DSM won't recognize it. And I just sat there and I was just floored. I suppose that was my jaw-dropping moment. It was like, you've got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
The DSM isn't recognizing it. Like there's a whole political thing going on with the DSM, and there's this going on as well. So all of us who have been looking for answers for decades, about why can't I fully function and be able to do all the things that I want to do in life, why is anxiety coming when I do it this way? This is the simplest way, and my clients love it. And it takes time to wrap our mind around this. But this is adult me. Oops, let's get like adult Linda. Mm-hmm. And remembering that trauma is a living legacy. This is trauma self. Mm-hmm. And when I can wrap my mind around separating the two, and it takes a bit. So when I understand that my brain is driving trauma self, then it gives me hope that I, as Linda, can now begin to navigate my way through it. So the brain drives trauma self, not the nervous system. The nervous system is driven by the brain. Mm-hmm. Okay, so then when I begin to wrap my mind around that, I begin to feel hope, because I know it's not me, the adult, that's having the problem. It's how my brain was trained, developed, underdeveloped, and like skills and structure and strategies from childhood. It lacks experiences, living examples, and so much more. There's just so much more to it. And then we begin to be able to go, right, let's get in and take one next step. But the good news is the World Health Organization, the IDC 11 this year on the 1st of January, listed complex trauma as a separate diagnosis. Okay. So that's a start.
Step, right. Step.
It's a step. However, with the DSM being the diagnostic statistics manual that everybody uses, it makes it really hard, because a lot of clinicians haven't even heard of complex trauma.
It's amazing. It is. Yeah. And it's so huge. I mean, for lack of better terms, it is such a huge type of trauma, and it's mind-blowing that this isn't recognized. And I love that you're bringing awareness to it. I love that you have turned that pain, that journey, this very long journey of discovery and understanding and advocating for yourself, which is so important. And we all should always advocate for ourselves. You've gotten to the stage of that pain is now your ultimate purpose in life, to help enlighten people about this, because people are walking through their daily lives, or maybe not, right? Their brain could be offline and they don't even get it. They don't know why. And so I love that this is your mission. This is your purpose. This is what you've gone forward with. You're going to help and have helped so many individuals come to this realization. And I also I would just like to take a second to point out what you just did, that little exercise of having the two separate selves, right? And I can see how when you separate them like that, it's not that this is who I am, right? It's not, I'm this way. I'm broken, I'm fixed. And well, even if you are broken, we're all broken, by the way. So, but that's it. Let's all bring that to the forefront of our lives. But when you begin to look at it like, this is how I processed because of how I was brought up. And like you said, the intergenerational trauma that compounds onto then your trauma, the abuse, everything else. It's not who you are, right? It's what you went through. And now it's the discovery of how to manage and bring yourself back online.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so vital. First of all, I do what I do because I don't want anyone to ever be as alone as I was in this journey. So, I run a big Facebook group because I don't want anyone to ever be alone and think there's no answers, there's no way through, because it's in connection that helps us begin to have the confidence that I can take one next step.
Yeah. And share the name of that group, Linda, so people can go and find it.
It's simply called Healing from Complex PTSD. It's on Facebook, and it's the peer support group. So it's not a typical Facebook group. We're actually in there being supportive of each other. So it's a very emotionally safe space. Yeah.
That's so
it has to be.
It has to be, of course. I mean, there's, we all need support in our journey, and to have a specified group that can really be giving from experience, the heart, the mind. I mean, that's what we need. We walk hand in hand in this life for a reason. And when you feel so alone, like there's nowhere to turn, you don't know what to do, most people just push it down, right? They just walk away from it and they're just like, okay, I don't want to deal with any of this, right? And that's where the real trouble then lies, is you're not bringing this part of you inside coming to the forefront to understand it and then heal it, right? That pain can be transformed. So now in your beautiful stage of life, when people are trying to understand and they don't understand, they're in this, they feel lost, right? Let's go back to where you felt, right? What would be something that people, I mean, you've given us so many things for people to look out for, but what would be things for people to look out for, signs or signals of, okay, I really need to think of this in a different way than what's maybe being told to me, and I need to look into complex trauma?
One of the simplest things you can do is do an ACEs study test. Okay, it's 10 simple questions, and whilst it's not, the be all and end all, first of all, it's a simple 10 questions that can give you an idea if it's impacting your life. Another thing that you can look at is if there's anxiety and you don't know why. So I suffered with anxiety for a lot of years and didn't know why. Like, it just didn't make sense. Depression, and it doesn't make sense. So these can be things that are driven by the brain, and it's not you. The brain's driving them in response to you trying to live an adult life, but it was trained in a different way in childhood, and it's coming back and impacting you now because it hasn't filed away all the distress from childhood. Now, the distress in childhood is really hard to wrap our minds around, because when we come through these families, even if we can say, oh yeah, that was dysfunctional, we believe as an adult we're doing something different. And, we usually are. Like, I raised my children different, but the impact on them has been significant. So we've all had to walk together. But how you really know is in your health. So is your health suffering and it doesn't make sense? In your relationships, so like for me, whose only goal was to never be divorced. It just was something I never wanted. And I really believed, so I obviously wasn't equipped at the time to know that I didn't know. And that's a big thing in complex trauma, is we don't know that we don't know. Okay. Look at your relationships, and are you having challenges in them? Okay. Challenges that you may not know how to go around, how to navigate as well. in your career, are you chopping and changing jobs a lot? So trying to stay stable in one job is really hard. So that can be another indication. I know these are general, but people who haven't got developmental trauma usually have a sense of a stable relationship. They'll have a job or a career, so it might change workplace, but their career is consistent. Their health is not impacted.
Right.
Okay. So their health, they can be just generally fine. But like me, there were things in my health that were indicators. So getting epilepsy at 15, and there's no family history of it, just none. Getting the getting postnatal depression, but in between all of that, I had a lot of like glandular fever. I got glandular fever really bad. I got stomach disorders. I had migraines. Migraines are a really big indication. Not scientifically, but migraine. Well, there are scientific reasons that migraines point to trauma. But people who suffer migraines definitely look into if you've got developmental trauma, because the more I've read, it is one of the key indications.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That is so helpful. It really is to hear. And I actually really like that you talk in generalizations, because some of these things may seem like, okay, I can't keep a job, or I feel this way about my relationships. And it's maybe not something that is on the forefront of your mind to address. You're just constantly repeating a pattern because you're not going to the core root issue of why these patterns happened in the first place. So I think that that's really good to talk in that way, because people can just say, okay, well, wait a second, let me take a step back and think about, and maybe go back to some things in my childhood that I didn't address, didn't want to think about, didn't even think to think about. Maybe they weren't so obtuse back then, in their life. And it was something that maybe they have a blind spot to. So I think that that's really good. I think that's really, really helpful for people to be aware.
I think you've got to be willing to be curious and start looking.
Yeah.
One of the easiest ways, I was just thinking, one of the easiest ways would be to go to my YouTube channel, because I have so many practical videos. And if you can relate to them, then you know that you need to start getting curious about what really happened for you, as what your whole brain, body, nervous system, mind experienced, because the brain is really good at hiding it. The brain numbs. So we don't numb ourselves. We can numb ourselves externally with alcohol or food or extreme sports, if that's your thing, because it makes you feel good. You know what I mean? Anything that doesn't add to your health. But the brain actually, part of the trigger response is the brain numbs. Okay. And pardon me, that can stop us alone from seeking out and being curious. So in our own hearts, we can know, we might feel that there's a hole inside of us, or we might feel in our hearts there has to be more to this, more to my life than what I'm seeing. And it's in being willing to pursue that. Now, the first thing you're going to feel when you're willing to pursue that is scared out of your brain.
Of course.
So you've got to be able to recognize that the brain's going, no, we're not going there.
Right.
And say, no, but I want answers. I want this truly fulfilled life. I don't want to sit back. As one of my friends says, they're content. That's how they put it.
We don't want to be content.
No.
We want to be full and free and big dreams.
That's right.
Yeah.
I want, and I still haven't even got to the point where I know, what's the biggest dream. I don't have all of that yet, but I know I'm getting there.
Of course.
But I want to encourage people to not give up on yourself. irrespective of what everyone and everything around you says or implies. A lot of implications in families.
Yes, there are.
Don't give up on you, and don't give up on your dreams to have a really full, happy, healthy whole life.
Absolutely.
Because we can. Now we can. The neuroscience has only been in the public domain around 5, maybe 6 years at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So just take that one step to keep moving forward and to live this life that you really dream of living.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Linda, I just love you. I mean, you just encompass all of the goodness that we hope everybody can feel. And I also want to point out, I love this too, how you said, I haven't even discovered what the biggest dream is yet. And yet you have all of these amazing things fulfilled in your life so far, right? Australia's first, the world's first, the world's first. I mean, those are amazing, huge accomplishments. And you are such a testament to when you are curious, when you want to know and evolve and expand, you create this life for you. And that you just explained everything that this whole summit encompasses, that we are limitless beyond our belief system, right? Our belief system is what stops us from thinking, I have another dream that's undiscovered. But you're going. I mean, you're the living, breathing proof of life beyond an undiagnosed diagnosis.
Well, yeah. And also too, I think where he wants, I wanted more, not just for myself, but for my children.
Yeah.
Like I realized that this was going to impact my children. So staying in a marriage where there was so much anger behind closed doors, I didn't want my children believing that that was life. You know what I mean? So they've all picked up on doing this too, and in their own ways are pursuing. They're the second generation now that are pursuing good health. Mm-hmm. And I have one granddaughter, and my daughter mothers her and in a completely different way. And I've said to my kids, whatever you do, take what was good from me, throw the rest in the bin, and then use the internet, use the information, get mentors, do whatever it takes to grow into the next generation that we need here. And they all are. So they've all had the impact of mental health as well. And I can only see the mental health arena getting bigger and bigger because we've gone too long not knowing about this, and not having people who actually are living it coming up and saying, well, this is the way that works. I'm doing part 2 of a course with Janina Fisher at the moment, and she said, so she was one of the leaders at the forefront, and she said, we need the people now who are actually living it and healing to come forward and help us understand it even more. And I'm like, every single one of us. So every time I go into either supervision with other coaches or anything that I have to do online, I say, we all need to understand and embrace that we are all needed here. We are all needed now. And we are all needed to help each other through this process that's been going on for generations, and we just didn't know.
Just didn't know. Now it's all coming out. It's all everyone's being educated. And that is why I'm so happy to have you on this summit to give a voice to something that really was voiceless, something that was just not understood or talked about at all. And I hope that this interview has inspired anybody that is curious, even just a little bit, to reach out to you. Go to Linda's YouTube channel, find her Facebook peer group, just have a conversation, because it could change everything in your life, things that you didn't really understand or know. Just reach out, right? It's all about, this is what this is here for, to educate and there's someone there to hold your hand. There is someone there to help you. And so don't be afraid to do that. And so, Linda, I thank you so, so much for this wonderful interview. Thank you for opening up your heart, sharing your story. And before we close, I know you brought with you a wonderful gift for everybody, but do you have any closing thoughts? Do you have anything that you want to wrap everything up with now and leave us with before we go into the gift that you brought everyone?
If in your heart you know that there is more to life, then have the courage to start looking, because you'll never regret it. It may change everything in your life, but you will never regret it. And you don't, so if you listen to all the, motivational people and everything, you're supposed to have a plan and you're supposed to have it all sorted and do this and this. Don't worry about all of that. Just start with that one step of being willing to follow your heart wherever it leads, no matter how crazy it can look like. Don't do anything, that'll harm you, obviously. But just take that one next step and get curious and start reaching out to find out what it is that you need.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Right. And trust each step along the way, right? This is a process. Who has it all figured out? Please show me that one person that's got it all figured out, because I'll pay you $1 million. No, no one does. And to think that, and that's why, I love motivational speakers. I love them so much, but you just don't have it all figured out, because once you have one thing figured out, then that opens up the door to the 10 other things you had no clue were in front of you. So just keep going, just keep taking action, and that courage you talk about. Just have courage. It's in your heart. It is there. It's in your soul. We have it. Harness it. Find that, like, your resiliency will grow from there. Like, that's what it's all about. It's one step. So thank you for the closing words, and tell us, you brought this wonderful, wonderful gifts for people called From Aces to Recovery. And I love that.
Well, I realize how hard it is to navigate something that you have no idea about, okay? Because that's how it was for me. And so I wanted to make it really, really easy for everybody to have something right in front of them that they can go, oh, now this makes sense. So I've put together a booklet for the ACEs test for you, so you don't have to go trying to go through Google Sheets and pages to find it. A roadmap for healing and recovery from complex trauma, and also a little ebook on why you haven't heard about it till now, but what's been happening behind the scenes, so that you know that you haven't been imagining or missing anything, that there have been people at work. So 3 different things.
So great. Thank you so much. I mean, look at all this goodness. Not only did you get all this knowledge from this interview, but then there's so many resources that you gave. That's so lovely and so gracious of you. Thank you for that. And if anybody is in the coaching world, or just you're an individual and you want to get certified in this and understand, I mean, I'm going to be one of them, because this is something that is it is so intriguing and interesting to me to understand the neuroscience behind, and then to give voice to something that really has not had its platform. And so you can contact Linda if you would like to do that as well. She's got an amazing program and certification for that. So Linda, thank you so very much. Thank you for being the beauty in tragedy and bringing light to a topic that we so desperately need to know about.
Thank you. It's an honor and a privilege to be here and share with you, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Bye everyone.
Bye.